The soft, buttery light of the first-class cabin cast long shadows as Serafina Vance settled into seat 2A. For her, this was a uniform, a well-worn grey hoodie from her college days, black leggings, and a pair of noise-cancelling headphones that were her shield against the world. She pulled the hood up, sinking into the plush leather, a ghost in a world of tailored suits and expensive perfume. The low hum of the Boeing 787's engines was a familiar lullaby, the scent of leather and sterilized air a strange sort of comfort. This was her sanctuary, the one place where the crushing weight of her legacy felt a million miles away. She was just Sarah, a young woman with a good playlist and a long flight ahead. The quiet rhythm of boarding was broken by a voice that seemed to slice through the calm. Excuse me, you're in my way." Serafina didn't look up, but she felt the presence loom over her. It was a man, his voice slick with an entitlement that was as pungent as his cologne. He was speaking to the flight attendant, Clara, a woman with kind eyes and a smile that had clearly been tested over a long career. "Sir, if you'll just give me a moment, I can place your coat in the closet for you," Clara said, her tone a masterclass in professional patience. "Just take it," the man snapped, thrusting a heavy cashmere coat at her. "And get me a whiskey. Macallan 18. Neat. 2 ice cubes on the side. Not in the glass, on the side. Can you manage that?" Serafina finally glanced up from beneath her hood. The man was impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than her car. His hair was silver at the temples, perfectly coiffed. He had the kind of face that was used to people saying yes. He stuffed his carry-on, a gleaming leather monstrosity, into the overhead bin with a grunt, slamming it shut with unnecessary force. His ticket, she noted, was for 2B, her seatmate. A wave of exhaustion washed over her. It was going to be one of those flights. He settled into his seat with a heavy sigh, as if the very act of sitting was a monumental effort. He didn't acknowledge her presence, instead pulling out a phone and beginning a conversation so loud it seemed intended for the entire cabin. "Mark, it's Richard." "Yes, Sterling." "Of course, Sterling. Listen, the deal is closed. Squeezed them for every last penny. They folded like a cheap suit, just as I said they would. No, the Hampton property. Amateurs. You'd think they'd know who they were dealing with by now." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Serafina closed her eyes, turning up the volume on her headphones. The melodic piano of a Ludovico Einaudi piece tried to drown him out, but his voice was a persistent drill. She could feel his condescension radiating from him like heat. He finally ended his call as the plane began to taxi. He huffed, looking around the cabin with a critical eye. His gaze landed on Serafina, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see her. A slow, dismissive scan from her worn sneakers to the top of her grey hood. A faint sneer curled his lip. "You know," he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear, "I remember a time when first class had a certain standard, a dress code. Now it seems they're just letting anyone in. Probably some sort of diversity initiative." He didn't say it to her, but it was aimed at her, a missile of casual cruelty. Serafina didn't move. She didn't open her eyes. Her heart rate ticked up a single angry beat, but her expression remained serene. Reacting was what he wanted. It was the fuel he ran on. She would not give it to him. Clara arrived with his whiskey. "Your Macallan, Mr. Sterling." "About time," he grumbled, snatching the glass. He took a sip, swirled it, and made a face. "Is this really the 18? Tastes a bit pedestrian. You're sure you didn't grab the 12 by mistake?" "I poured it from the bottle myself, sir," Clara replied, her smile unwavering. "It is the 18 year." "Humph, I'll be the judge of that." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand and turned his attention back to his phone. Serafina took a deep, slow breath. The scent of aged whiskey and arrogance filled the small space between them. She could feel his judgment, a physical weight in the air. He had already written her story in his head. A young black woman, probably a student or maybe a musician, who'd scraped together enough miles or won some contest to get a seat she didn't deserve. He saw her clothes, her skin, her youth, and concluded she was out of her depth. He had no idea he was the one drowning. The ascent was smooth, the 787 punching through the clouds into a realm of impossible blue and blinding sunlight. Serafina had a ritual for this part of the flight. She would watch the world shrink, the cars becoming toys, and the houses vanishing into a patchwork of green and grey. It was a reminder of perspective. From up here, a man like Richard Sterling was less than a speck of dust. He, however, was determined to make his presence felt. He finished his whiskey in 2 gulps and slammed the empty glass down on the small table between them. He didn't use his call button. He simply snapped his fingers in the air as Clara passed by. "Girl, another." Clara stopped, her professional smile tightening at the edges. "Of course, sir. Another whiskey? Is there an echo in here?" "Yes, another whiskey. And be quicker about it this time. The service on this airline has gone straight downhill. Utterly pathetic." He leaned back, his elbow encroaching on Serafina's armrest. She subtly shifted away, pressing herself against the cool wall of the fuselage. He noticed the movement and seemed to take it as a challenge. He stretched, his arm pressing more firmly against hers. It was a petty power play, a small physical assertion of dominance. Serafina refused to engage. She focused on the music, on the vast emptiness outside her window. She had dealt with men like Richard Sterling her entire life, men who saw her as an obstacle, an anomaly, or an opportunity to prove their own superiority. Her father, a man whose quiet strength could command a boardroom of sharks, had taught her the art of strategic patience. "Never wrestle with a pig," he used to say. "You both get dirty, and a pig likes it." Richard, however, was not content with being ignored. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to see her flustered, angry, or intimidated. Her calm was an insult to his ego. Clara returned with the second whiskey. As she placed it on his tray table, the plane hit a brief minor patch of turbulence. It was nothing, a slight shudder that barely registered. But Richard used it. With a theatrical lurch, he knocked his arm against the glass, sending a splash of amber liquid onto the floor, dangerously close to Serafina's canvas tote bag on the floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake," he boomed. "Look what you made me do, clumsy girl. Now my $1,200 trousers are at risk. Get me some napkins. A whole stack of them." Clara, flustered, immediately knelt. "I am so sorry, sir. It was the turbulence." "Excuses, excuses." He waved her off. "Just clean it up." Serafina watched the exchange from behind her placid mask. She saw the flicker of humiliation in Clara's eyes, the way she bit her lip as she dabbed at the carpet with a cloth. Richard didn't even look at her, already engrossed in a financial report on his tablet. He had used his power to belittle a woman just doing her job, and it had cost him nothing. Serafina slowly reached down and moved her tote bag a few inches further under her own seat. A quiet, deliberate motion. Richard's eyes flicked towards her. "Good idea," he said with a smirk. "Wouldn't want to damage whatever trinkets you have in there." The words hung in the air. Trinkets. He had dismissed her entire existence, everything she carried with her, as worthless. Still, she said nothing. She simply met his gaze for a fraction of a second, her dark eyes unreadable, before turning back to the window. His frustration was palpable. He was a predator who had cornered his prey, but the prey refused to show fear. He huffed again, a sound of pure exasperation, and turned his attention to the in-flight entertainment system, stabbing at the screen with an impatient finger. He settled on a movie, but he didn't use the airline-provided headphones. Instead, he played it through his tablet's speakers, a tinny cacophony of explosions and shouting that filled the cabin. Several passengers shot him annoyed looks. The man in 3A, a distinguished-looking gentleman with a white beard, leaned forward. "Excuse me, sir, would you mind using headphones?" Richard glared at him. "I'll mind my business. You mind yours, old man. I paid for this seat. I'll enjoy it how I see fit." The man recoiled, stunned into silence. Clara approached again, her expression pleading. "Sir, for the comfort of the other passengers, we do require that you use headphones." "Are you the comfort police now?" Richard sneered. "Get me another whiskey, and don't spill this one." He was creating his own little kingdom of misery at 35,000 feet, and he was daring anyone to challenge his rule. Serafina felt a slow, cold anger begin to coalesce in her chest. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Clara, who was being treated like a servant. It was about the other passengers whose peace was being shattered. It was about the unspoken rules of decency and respect that this man was gleefully setting on fire. Her father had also taught her something else. Patience was a strategy, not a surrender. You wait, you observe, you gather your facts, and you let your opponent overplay their hand. And Richard Sterling was not just overplaying his hand, he was about to set the whole card table ablaze. Serafina closed her eyes again, but this time she wasn't retreating into her music. She was waiting for the perfect moment to call his bluff. The third whiskey seemed to dissolve the last of Richard Sterling's already frayed inhibitions. He had abandoned his movie and was now scrolling through his phone, chuckling to himself. He would occasionally read something aloud to an imaginary audience, a news headline about a rival's misfortune or a crude joke from a group chat. Each utterance was a fresh intrusion, a new claim of ownership over the shared space. Serafina had finally taken her headphones off. The music was no longer a comfort, it was a distraction from the data she was gathering. She needed to hear every word, catalogue every offense. Her calm exterior was now a deliberate, tactical choice. Inside, a storm was gathering force. She thought of the hundreds of employees like Clara, dedicated professionals who had to endure people like this every single day, absorbing their venom with a forced smile. She thought of the values her father had instilled in this company, values of respect, integrity, and service. Richard Sterling was not just a rude passenger, he was a walking, talking violation of everything Vance Global Airways stood for. He swiveled in his seat, his gaze once again falling on her. The alcohol had made his eyes glassy, and his sneer more pronounced. He seemed to be searching for a new line of attack. His eyes landed on her hair, which she wore in intricate, beautiful braids. "You know," he began, his voice slurring slightly, "I'll never understand that. All that work must take forever. Seems like a lot of effort just to look so unprofessional." This was it, the direct hit. It was no longer a vague comment about standards or an accidental spill. This was personal, pointed, and steeped in a brand of ignorance so profound it was almost impressive. Serafina turned her head slowly to face him. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him, her expression a perfect, unnerving blank. Her silence only egged him on. He leaned in closer, the foul stench of whiskey on his breath washing over her. "I'm just saying, in the real world, in a corporate environment, you have to present a certain image. You can't just walk in looking like you're on your way to a music festival. But I suppose you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" He gestured around the first-class cabin. "This is a world of achievement, of merit. People here have earned their place. They've built things. They haven't just been given a handout because of some quota." The word quota hung between them, heavy and ugly. He had finally said the quiet part out loud. He saw her as an undeserving recipient of a charity she hadn't earned, a token presence in a world where she didn't belong. Serafina felt the last thread of her strategic patience snap. Not with a fiery explosion, but with a sudden, chilling clarity. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. She still didn't raise her voice. She spoke softly, her tone so quiet it was almost a whisper, forcing him to lean in even closer to hear. "Mr. Sterling, you seem to have a great many opinions." He smirked, victorious. He had finally gotten a response. "It's not an opinion, sweetheart. It's a fact. It's just how the world works." "Is that so?" she said, her voice still impossibly calm. "Tell me, in your world, what happens to a man who harasses a fellow passenger, insults the crew, and creates a disturbance on a federal airway?" His smirk faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about? I haven't done anything. You're the one who's being sensitive." "Am I?" Serafina's eyes, which had been placid moments before, now held a glint of steel. "You've been loud and disruptive since you boarded. You've been verbally abusive to the flight attendant. You've made racially charged, derogatory remarks to me. And right now you are leaning so far into my personal space that I can count the fillings in your teeth." Richard Sterling was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had already dismissed as inferior. His face flushed with anger. "Now you listen to me, you little—" He never finished the sentence. In one smooth, fluid motion, Serafina planted her foot squarely in the center of his chest. It wasn't a violent, flying kick. It was a firm, controlled, powerful shove. It was the physical equivalent of the word no. Richard, caught completely off guard and unsteady from the whiskey, was propelled backward. His bulk twisted, and he tumbled out of his seat, landing with a heavy, undignified thud in the narrow aisle. His legs tangled in the air before crashing down. His glass of water, which had been on the center console, flew up and drenched the front of his expensive suit. The cabin fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Every head in first class swiveled to stare. Richard Sterling lay sprawled in the aisle, gasping like a landed fish, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Clara rushed forward, her eyes wide with panic. "Ma'am, what happened?" "Are you all right, Mr. Sterling?" Richard pushed himself up onto his elbows, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "All right? Is he all right?" he sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at Serafina. That animal just assaulted me. She kicked me. I want her arrested. I want her thrown off this plane. Do you hear me? Arrest her now." Serafina hadn't moved. She sat in her seat, poised and calm, as if she had just finished a yoga class. She looked down at the sputtering man on the floor, then up at the frantic flight attendant. She finally spoke, and her voice, though still quiet, now carried an unmistakable weight of authority that cut through the chaos. "Clara," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "it's all right. Please, step back." Clara hesitated, torn between protocol and the sheer force of Serafina's command. Richard scrambled to his feet, his suit dripping, his dignity in shreds. "Don't you talk to her. You have no right. You're going to jail. I'll see to it. I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole damn airline," he shrieked, his voice cracking with rage. Serafina slowly rose from her seat. She wasn't tall, but she stood with a posture that seemed to add inches to her height. She looked Richard Sterling directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "You will do no such thing," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "You will not sue this airline. You will not have me arrested. And you will stop making a scene on my airplane." The three words hung in the air, charged with an electric disbelief. "My airplane?" Richard Sterling actually laughed. It was a high, hysterical sound, laced with fury and incredulity. "Your airplane. Your airplane. Honey, you couldn't afford the peanuts on this flight, let alone the whole plane. Have you lost your mind? Are you delusional?" He turned to the other passengers, seeking allies. "Did you hear that? She thinks she owns the plane. The girl in the hoodie who just assaulted a paying customer." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding his gaze. They had witnessed his behavior. They had heard his insults. While the kick was shocking, a part of them knew, on some level, that he had brought it upon himself. Clara, the flight attendant, looked utterly bewildered. "Ma'am, please, let's just calm down. We need to handle this according to procedure." "You are handling it perfectly, Clara," Serafina said, not taking her eyes off Richard. Her calm was more terrifying than his rage. "But the procedure is about to change." She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her phone. It was a simple, standard-issue smartphone, not the jewel-encrusted device Richard might have expected from a person of means. "What are you doing now? Calling your lawyer?" he sneered. "Good luck finding one who'll take your case." "No," Serafina said softly, "I'm calling my head of operations." She swiped the screen and tapped a name. She didn't put the phone to her ear. Instead, she pressed the speakerphone button, placing the device on the small console between the seats. The dial tone echoed in the silent cabin. After 2 rings, a man's voice answered, crisp and professional. "Marcus Thorne." "Marcus, it's Serafina Vance," she said calmly. Richard's sneer faltered for a second. The name Vance tickled a distant corner of his memory, but he couldn't place it. Vance. Vance. On the phone, Marcus's tone shifted instantly from professional to concerned. "Sarah, is everything all right? You're not supposed to be reachable. You're on the 787 to London, aren't you?" "I am," she confirmed. "And no, everything is not all right. We have a situation in the first-class cabin. I need you to listen very carefully." A murmur went through the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, straining to hear. Richard Sterling stood frozen, a dawning horror beginning to creep into his eyes. "I have a passenger in seat 2B, Serafina continued, her voice as clear as a bell. His name is Richard Sterling. He has been belligerent and verbally abusive to the flight crew, specifically to a flight attendant named Clara. He has been creating a public disturbance, and he has made multiple racist and harassing comments towards me, culminating in a physical intimidation that required me to create space for my own safety. Understood, Marcus's voice replied, devoid of surprise, full of grim efficiency. What are your orders? Orders. The word landed like a hammer blow. First, Serafina said, I want you to patch in Captain Eva Rostova on the flight deck. I want her to be aware of the situation and to know that I am handling it. Patching her in now, Marcus confirmed. A moment of static, then a new voice, female, with a slight Eastern European accent. This is Captain Rostova. Go ahead, Marcus. Captain, I have Ms. Vance on the line for you, Marcus said. Ms. Vance. The captain's voice was filled with a sudden profound respect. I'm sorry for any disturbance. We were alerted to a commotion, but were awaiting a report from the cabin crew. How can I assist you? Richard Sterling's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. The name. Vance. It finally clicked. Vance Global Airways, the name emblazoned on the tail of the very plane he was standing in. His eyes darted from the phone to Serafina's face, a look of pure terror dawning. Captain Rostova, Serafina said, thank you. For now, just maintain course. The situation is contained. My second order is for you, Marcus. I want you to have a team of federal agents meet us at the gate at Heathrow. For the passenger in 2B? Marcus asked. For Mr. Richard Sterling, yes, she confirmed. He is to be arrested for interference with a flight crew and passenger harassment. I will provide a full statement. It will be done, Marcus said. Third, Serafina's voice grew colder. I want you to look up Mr. Sterling's profile. He's a Sterling elite member, I'm sure. I want his status revoked, permanently. He is to be placed on the no-fly list for Vance Global and all our partner airlines. Effective immediately. Consider it done, Ms. Vance, Marcus said. And finally, Marcus, she paused, letting the weight of her final command settle in the silent cabin. Draft a letter to the board of directors at Sterling Holdings. Detail the events of this flight, including his public intoxication, his abusive behavior, and the federal charges he will be facing upon landing. Inform them that Vance Global will be reviewing all corporate contracts with their company. Send it to my personal email for approval within the hour. A choked, gurgling sound escaped Richard's throat. His entire world, his reputation, his business, his freedom, was being dismantled piece by a calm voice coming from a simple smartphone. Sarah, it's already drafted, Marcus's voice replied. I'll send it now. Serafina smiled, a thin, cold smile that did not reach her eyes. Thank you, Marcus. That's all for now. She disconnected the call. The silence that followed was absolute. She picked up her phone and slid it back into her hoodie pocket. Then she looked up at the man who stood trembling before her. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice now soft again. I believe your seat is empty. Please sit down. You're blocking the aisle. He didn't move. He stared at her, his jaw slack, his mind clearly unable to process the cataclysmic shift in reality. The girl in the hoodie. The diversity hire. The animal. She was Serafina Vance. The sole heir to the Vance fortune. The woman who didn't just have a seat on the plane, she owned the entire airline. The remainder of the flight passed in a state of surreal tension. Richard Sterling, a man who had filled the cabin with his booming voice and arrogant presence, collapsed back into his seat as if his bones had turned to jelly. He was utterly silent, his face a pale, sweaty mask of terror. He stared straight ahead, not daring to even glance in Serafina's direction. The bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a shrunken, pathetic figure. The transformation in the crew was immediate and profound. Clara, who had been on the verge of tears, now looked at Serafina with a mixture of awe and gratitude. She approached cautiously, her professional demeanor now layered with a deep personal respect. Ms. Vance, she whispered, is there anything at all I can get for you? Water? Tea? Serafina gave her a warm, genuine smile, the first she had shown on the flight. The cold, authoritative mask was gone, replaced by the compassionate leader she truly was. Clara, please, call me Sarah, and what I would love is for you to take a 15-minute break. Go to the galley, sit down, and breathe. You've handled a difficult situation with incredible grace. I won't forget it." Clara's eyes welled up. "Thank you, Ms. Vance. Thank you." She nodded and retreated, walking with a lighter step than she had all day. A few minutes later, the curtain to the cockpit parted and a woman in a crisp pilot's uniform emerged. It was Captain Eva Rostova. She walked directly to seat 2A and leaned down slightly. "Ms. Vance," she said in a low, respectful voice, "Captain Rostova, I wanted to apologize personally for the unacceptable behavior of that passenger. It is not the standard we uphold at Vance Global." "Captain, there's no need to apologize," Serafina replied. "You are running a perfect flight. The issue was with one individual, not the airline. Your crew, especially Clara, has been exemplary." "I'm glad to hear you say so," the captain said, her relief palpable. "We have been in communication with your team on the ground. Everything is in place for our arrival at Heathrow. Is there anything else you require?" "No, Captain. Thank you for checking in. Please get back to flying your plane. You're doing a wonderful job," Serafina said. The captain gave a curt, respectful nod and returned to the flight deck. Serafina spent the next hour working. She pulled a slim, unmarked tablet from her tote bag, the trinkets Richard had mocked, and began reviewing quarterly reports and fuel cost analyses. She was focused, her mind a sharp instrument cutting through complex data. This was the real Serafina Vance, not just an heiress, but a brilliant, hands-on CEO who knew every facet of her business. As she worked, she felt the weight of Richard Sterling's fear from the seat next to her. It was a bitter, unpleasant feeling. She took no joy in his downfall. She hadn't acted out of spite or a desire for revenge. She had acted out of necessity. He was a cancer in the system she had sworn to protect. The kick had not been an act of aggression. It had been a surgical removal of a threat. The descent into London was grey and rainy. Richard Sterling seemed to shrink with every foot of lost altitude. The colour had completely drained from his face, leaving it a waxy, sallow yellow. He kept dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief, his hand trembling. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, Captain Rostova's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. We ask that all passengers remain seated to allow a special security detail to board the aircraft before deplaning begins. Thank you for your cooperation." A special security detail. The word sent a final chilling shockwave through the first-class cabin. Richard let out a small, pathetic whimper. The moment the plane docked, the silence was broken by a firm knock. The door opened to reveal 2 UK Border Force officers and a man in a tailored suit. The lead officer stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the passengers until it landed on the trembling man in seat 2B. "Mr. Richard Sterling?" the officer asked, his voice polite but unyielding. Richard could only nod, his throat working but producing no sound. "Sir, I'm Inspector Davies. I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. Please gather your personal belongings." Richard moved as if in a trance, fumbling with his carry-on. As the officers escorted him towards the door, he had to pass Serafina's seat. He stopped for a fraction of a second, his eyes pleading. For what? Forgiveness? Mercy? A reversal of the inevitable? Serafina met his gaze, her expression not of triumph, but of a deep, weary disappointment. "Respect is not a difficult concept, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice so low it was only for him. "But it is a mandatory one, here and everywhere else." He flinched as if she had struck him, and the officers gently but firmly guided him out of the plane and onto the jet bridge, where he disappeared from view. Only then did the other passengers begin to stir. The man in 3A, who Richard had called an old man, caught Serafina's eye and gave her a slow, deliberate nod of approval. An older woman across the aisle simply whispered, "Thank you." Serafina remained in her seat until the cabin was nearly empty. She was the last to deplane. On the jet bridge, the man in the suit was waiting for her. "Ms. Vance," he said, extending a hand. "Julian Croft, Head of European Operations. Welcome to London." "Julian," she said, shaking his hand as they began to walk. The flight was illuminating. "So I gathered," he said with a thin smile. "The man is exactly as our intel suggested. His arrogance isn't just a personality flaw, it's his business model." The phone call about the Hampton property? Serafina asked, her voice laced with ice. Did we get it? Crystal clear audio, Julian confirmed. He squeezed them for every last penny, bragged about folding them like a cheap suit. It's the same predatory tactic he's using to try and crush Aerovectrix. He thinks bullying and brute force are the only tools in the box. This flight had never been a coincidence. 2 days earlier, Marcus Thorne had flagged that Richard Sterling, the CEO of the firm attempting a hostile takeover of a small innovative aerospace company Vance Global wanted to acquire ethically, had booked a last-minute ticket on her flight. She could have changed her plans. Instead, she saw an opportunity. Clara Jenkins, the flight attendant, wasn't just a kind-eyed veteran. She was the most trusted senior purser in the fleet, fully aware of Serafina's identity and briefed to act naturally, but to be her eyes and ears. And now his own board has a federal incident report and a pending international criminal charge to consider. Julian mused, a grim satisfaction in his tone. His credibility is shot. More than shot. We have cause, Serafina countered. They reached the bustling arrivals hall, a world away from the sterile tension of the plane. The drama at 35,000 feet was over. The corporate endgame was just beginning. She stopped near the large windows, looking out at the rain-slicked tarmac. Julian, forget reviewing our contracts with Sterling Holdings. I want you to terminate them, all of them. Cite the morals clause. His conduct was an embarrassment to our brand and a risk to our crew. It will be my pleasure, Ms. Vance, he replied, already making a note on his phone. And one more thing, she said, her eyes fixed on a distant Vance Global jet being serviced. Contact our legal team. I want our formal acquisition offer on the desk of the Aerovectrix CEO by 9 a.m. London time. A generous offer, well above market value. And with it, I want you to attach Purser Jenkins's full, unedited incident report from today's flight. Let them see the true character of the man trying to strong-arm their company into a sale. Julian looked up from his phone, a slow smile spreading across his face. He gave you the weapon to beat him, and he never even knew it. You're not just blocking his takeover, you're using his own character flaws to win. My father taught me that a man's character is his destiny, Serafina said softly. Richard Sterling just chose a very public, very expensive one. She then turned her attention back to him. And Clara Jenkins, I want her promoted to head of in-flight services for the European sector. She earned it today. Consider it done, Julian said with a respectful nod. I can take it from here. He melted back into the crowd to execute his orders. Serafina Vance stood alone for a moment in the middle of the terminal. She pulled her grey hood back up, the simple fabric a kind of armor. No one looking at the unassuming young woman would guess the intricate corporate chess match she had just won. They would not know that she had protected her employees, defended her father's values, and secured a multi-million-dollar acquisition, all without ever raising her voice. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of victory, and walked out into the cool London rain, a predator disguised in college sweats, leaving the wreckage of a lesser man's ego far behind her. Hours later, in a sterile windowless room deep within Heathrow's security sector, Richard Sterling finally understood the true meaning of silence. The buzzing of a fluorescent light was the only sound. The air was cold and smelled of antiseptic. He sat on a hard plastic chair, his water-stained $1,200 suit now hopelessly wrinkled. His bravado had long since curdled into a sour knot of dread in his stomach. An officer had taken his phone, but had just returned it, informing him he was allowed one call to his legal counsel before formal processing. His hands, slick with a cold sweat, trembled as he scrolled to the contact for his lawyer, a man whose astronomical fees were justified by his reputation as a corporate barracuda. The phone rang once, twice, before a crisp, unfamiliar female voice answered, "Law offices of Abramovich and Kane." "It's Richard Sterling," he said, his own voice sounding weak and thin. "I need to speak to Arthur Abramovich. Immediately. It's an emergency." There was a pause, the faint clicking of a keyboard. "One moment, sir." The silence stretched, each second a new turn of the screw. He could feel the cold metal of the table beneath his forearms, the rough texture of his ruined suit against his skin. The voice returned, devoid of warmth. Mr. Sterling, I'm afraid Mr. Abramovich is unavailable. Unavailable? Richard barked, a flash of his old arrogance returning. I pay him a 7-figure retainer. Put him on the phone now, or I'll— Sir, the voice cut him off, sharp as broken glass. Mr. Abramovich has instructed me to inform you that, pursuant to the morals and reputational risk clause in your retainer agreement, our firm is terminating its relationship with you and your holdings, effective immediately. A formal notice has been sent to your board. We will not be representing you in this matter. Please do not contact this office again. The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone, his mouth agape. The cold dread in his stomach turned to ice. It wasn't just the airline, the deal, the arrest. His entire support structure, the impenetrable legal wall he had built around himself, had just vanished. He was alone. The fluorescent light buzzed louder, a mocking laugh in the suffocating silence. Meanwhile, in a penthouse suite overlooking the glittering, rain-washed expanse of London, Serafina sat not in a power suit, but in a simple t-shirt and sweats. The infamous grey hoodie was draped over the back of a chair. On the large screen of her tablet, Marcus Thorne's face was sharp and clear. The fallout is even more spectacular than we anticipated, Marcus said, a rare wolfish grin on his face. The financial news channels have already picked up the story of Sterling's detainment. His board invoked the key person clause and suspended him indefinitely. Their stock is in freefall. Abramovich dropping him was the kill shot. A self-inflicted wound, Serafina said, her voice calm. She took a sip of her tea. What about Aerovectrix? They accepted the offer 30 minutes ago, Marcus reported. Their CEO, a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne, called me directly. She said, and I quote, "Any company whose leader protects her people like that is a company we want to be a part of." Clara's incident report was the final nail in Sterling's coffin. Good, Serafina said, a flicker of genuine warmth in her eyes. Dr. Thorne is brilliant. We need her innovation. Ensure she has complete autonomy and double her R&D budget. Already in the works, Marcus confirmed. He paused, then his grin widened. And the Hampton property deal, the one he was so proud of. The amateurs he squeezed, Serafina asked, a hint of a smile playing on her own lips. They were a shell corporation we set up 3 weeks ago, run by our most ruthless junior legal counsel, who we told to act like a nervous intern, Marcus explained. We have a full recording of Sterling threatening, bullying, and bragging his way through the negotiation. It's a masterclass in corporate malpractice. We sent that recording to the Aerovectrix board as a supplemental file. Dr. Thorne called it disgusting but illuminating. The trap had been far more elaborate than just one flight. They hadn't just observed the predator in his natural habitat, they had baited the habitat itself. There's one more piece, Marcus added, his eyes twinkling. The passenger in 3A, the old man Sterling insulted. The gentleman with the white beard, Serafina recalled, he seemed distinguished. That was Sir Alistair Finch, Marcus said, savouring the reveal, former head of the Civil Aviation Authority and current chair of the European Aerospace Ethics Committee. He was flying to London for the annual regulatory conference, where Sterling was scheduled to be the keynote speaker. Serafina's eyebrows rose slightly. You knew he would be on that flight. We didn't just know, Marcus corrected her gently. We booked his ticket, a very quiet, anonymous upgrade. We simply created the conditions for a test. Sterling's arrogance did the rest. Sir Alistair has already withdrawn his invitation and is launching an ethics investigation into Sterling Holdings. The man didn't just insult a passenger, he publicly alienated the most powerful regulator on the continent. Richard Sterling, blinded by his own superiority, had never once stopped to consider that the stage for his grand performance had been built by his victims. And every person in the audience was a judge. A notification pinged softly on Serafina's tablet. It was an email from Clara Jenkins. Ms. Vance, I just heard about the promotion. I don't have the words. It's not just the job. For years, people like him have made me question if this work was worth it. They chip away at you. Today, you didn't just stand up for me, you stood up for all of us who wear this uniform. You reminded me that it stands for something noble. Thank you. I won't let you down. Serafina closed her eyes for a moment. This was the true profit margin. Not the stock price, not the successful acquisition, but the restored dignity of a good person. This was the legacy her father had truly cared about. She opened her eyes and looked back at Marcus. Make sure Clara's transition is smooth. Give her every resource she needs. Of course, Marcus said. You know, Sarah, your father would be proud. He always said the best way to judge a person's power is to see how they treat those with none. Mr. Sterling failed the test, she said simply. That's all this was. A test. They ended the call. Serafina stood and walked to the vast window. The rain had finally stopped. Below, the Thames was a dark ribbon threaded with light, and the sky was beginning to clear, revealing a smattering of stars. She picked up the grey hoodie from the chair, the fabric soft and familiar in her hands. It was her invisibility cloak, her connection to the world she fought for. A world where worth wasn't measured by the cost of a suit, but by the content of one's character. She folded it neatly, a silent promise to herself and to her father's memory, and laid it in her open suitcase, ready for the next time she needed to walk unseen among kings and monsters.